What if I told you that there were three things that you could do to help improve your communication in nearly any type of situation? By the end of this video, I'll give you three tips on how to do exactly that. I help my clients figure out how to stop having the same communication problems over and over again. And I've spent the last decade or so of my career figuring out how to delicately but successfully say hard things. Step one, meet the other person where they are. What do I mean by that? Let's take a work example first. Let's say the other person, your boss, likes for people to get straight to the point. They don't like a lot of fluff. They don't like a lot of lead in. They're not a big fan of pleasantries. If you come into their office and you need to talk to them, they want you to get straight to the point. So, what should you do if you're put in a position where you need to go into your boss's office and give them some information? You want to get straight to the point. Doing so will help them then be able to hear what it is you have to say. Don't provide them with all the background information initially. Give them the bottom line up front and then have all the data and all the information to back up your point if you need it and if they ask you questions. But don't provide them with a long lead up if they don't want it. Don't provide them with all of the details about how you arrived at the decision if they just want you to get straight to the point. On the contrary, if you have another boss or somebody else in your chain of command that likes a lot of context, that likes a lot of lead in, that doesn't want you to get straight to the point, they like to have some pleasantries and some chit chat before you get down to business, then you need to go into their office and have a different approach where you go through some pleasantries, you give them the background information, you help them see how you arrived at your conclusion, and then you give them the conclusion. Meeting the other person where they are helps you be able to get your point across because then you've given them what they want and they are in a better headspace, a better frame of mind, a better position to be able to hear what you are saying, give you feedback if necessary, talk through any questions that you might have. They are better able to hear you if you meet them where they are. Let's take this in a personal context. We're still on point number one, meeting the other person where they are. Let's say that you want to have a conversation with your partner about the fact that they forgot to do the laundry, so the kids don't have the uniforms that they need for soccer practice or hockey practice or field hockey practice, whatever the case may be. Meeting your partner where they are might mean you don't have that conversation as soon as they've walked in the door from going grocery shopping or running an errand or coming back from work, right? You maybe give them 5 minutes, give them 10 minutes, let them settle in, and then you bring up the point or the conversation that you want to bring up with them when they're in a better headspace. You meet them where they're at so that you're then able to put them in a position where they're better able to hear you. And then you're setting yourself up for success because they're able to hear you and then you're able to get your point across. Once you've connected with them on their level, they're better able to hear your wants, your needs, your request of them. And so you're in a much better position to be able to at least have a calm, cool, collected conversation about whatever the point is that you want to bring up with them. Point number two for increased effectiveness in communication. You want to watch for nonverbal cues that communicate emotions. What do I mean by this? We can say a lot without using actual words. Our body language can convey a ton of information if we want it to, even if we don't want it to sometimes. And another person's body language can also convey a lot of information about where their head is at and whether or not they are hearing us. I've cited a statistic before that I read that said over half, I think it's about 55% of our communication is nonverbal. So somebody can be telling you a lot even if they aren't using words. For example, my face can get really loud in meetings, in situations where I might hear something and not quite understand what was going on, or maybe I'm having trouble placing it, or maybe I'm trying to determine if I heard what I think I heard. My face can be very loud and my face can say a lot, even if my mouth is completely shut. Therefore, we want to not only be aware of what our own nonverbal communication is doing, but we want to be aware of what the other person's nonverbal communication is saying. So we need to look for those cues in whoever we are talking to. For example, in a work context, if we are giving our boss some information that they've asked for, are they sitting up in their chair? Are they looking at us through the camera? Or are they sitting back with their arms crossed? Does it look like they're looking at their email? Does it look like they're looking at their phone? Does it look like they are otherwise engaged and not actually listening to what we are saying? We need to be aware of that so that we can then adjust and calibrate accordingly. One nonverbal cue that I just want to highlight that could mean a number of different things is if somebody is looking down, again, this is in a work context, if somebody is looking down and taking notes, right? If you can see that they are taking notes on what it is that you're saying, that they are writing something down, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, right? They could be taking down notes for their own understanding, for their own edification, or they could be taking down notes so that they don't forget questions that they might have for you. So we just want to be aware when we are watching for nonverbal cues that we don't assume unless it's pretty standard. And even then, depending on cultural considerations and cultural differences, somebody's nonverbal cues might not mean what we think they mean, but we need to be aware of them so that we can either ask for clarification or be on the lookout about whether or not we need to adjust and calibrate what we are saying accordingly. And nonverbal cues in a personal context. Again, these are similar. If you are attempting to have a discussion with your partner, let's say about the laundry, right? If they are sitting back or their arms are crossed or they're just looking at their phone and they're not really paying attention to you, those are all nonverbal cues. So even if they say, I'm listening, but they're looking down at their phone, or they appear to be watching the TV, or they are having a conversation with somebody else, right? Maybe one of your kids is asking for their attention. You need to be aware of the nonverbal cues that your partner is giving off, and then you can adjust and calibrate accordingly in terms of figuring out whether or not you want to continue the conversation, figuring out if maybe you need to table it when you're able to have their full attention, or if it's okay for you to continue. And maybe they weren't listening before, but they have since put their phone away. Maybe the kids are otherwise occupied, and now they can both verbally and non-verbally give you their full attention. And finally, we have point 3. If you have unpleasant news for somebody, please don't surprise them with it. I'm going to say that again. If you have bad, negative, or unpleasant news to share, please don't surprise the other person with it. You want to give them a little bit of lead in, right? Now, I'm not saying that maybe you just were informed of something that's unpleasant, that's surprising, that you need to convey, let's say in a work context, to your boss. I'm not saying you need to have prepped them way in advance if you did not know way in advance. However, when you go in to convey this information to your boss, you might want to have some sort of lead in where you're just like, hey, I just heard back from so and so, and the news isn't good. Some sort of preparation so that they know, oh, okay, the news isn't good, and they are mentally in that headspace where they can hear it. Giving the person the opportunity to prepare for the bad news will help them be in a position to be better able to hear it. They might still have a strong reaction to the news. They might still not like the news, but at least you've given them the opportunity to prepare. The same is true in a personal context. If you have bad or unpleasant news to share with somebody, please do not surprise them. Now, the way that you convey this news, you might not be able to tell them in person. You might have to tell them over a phone call. You might have to tell them in an email. You might have to tell them in a text message. This idea of not surprising them can work throughout all modes of communication. You just need to give them a little bit of lead in, a little bit of a heads up, a little bit of preparation before you spring the bad news on them. So, for example, this has happened to me on a number of occasions when I was younger with my siblings. If somebody called and said, I'm okay, but you know that they're getting ready to tell you something that might make your heart skip a beat, that might make you get really, really nervous, but you know they are okay. so you can then hear the bad news. I had a friend once who was in a pretty bad car accident, okay? And they called and they said, I'm okay, but, and then I knew that I was getting ready to hear some news that was unpleasant, but I knew that they were okay, they were safe, and then I was then able to hear the news without completely freaking out. I'm sure a lot of parents out there, if you have a kid who's out and about and old enough to be out and about, if you got a text message or a phone call that said, I'm okay, but your heart skips a beat, you're trying to figure out what happened, but you at least know that they are okay. So the bad news comes with a little bit of preparation and you're not completely surprised. So being on the receiving end of that, if that helps for us to sort of understand why this is really important. If you got a call and somebody said, I'm okay, but, or we weren't expecting this, but, or I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but, like if you got a call and it started off like that, that would give you a little bit of preparation for the bad news that you knew was coming down the pike, but at least you had that little bit of preparation. So on the flip side, when we are the ones that have to deliver bad news, whether it's in a work context or a personal context, giving the other person that little bit of lead up, that little bit of lead time so that they can then prepare to hear the bad news is incredibly important. So those are the three things, the three tips to help improve your communication in nearly any situation. Step one, you want to meet the person where they are. Step two, you want to watch for nonverbal cues in communication. You want to watch for nonverbal cues that communicate their emotions. And then step three, you want to prepare somebody if you have to give them bad news. All right, so we've got step one, meet the person where they are. Step two, watch for nonverbal cues that communicate emotions. And then step three, don't surprise people with bad news. Give them a little bit of preparation, a little bit of lead in time. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions about any of those steps, if any of those things need clarification, if you'd like me to go into a little bit of more detail about any of them, or if any of the things that I said sparked your interest in another topic that you would like for me to make a video about. I hope that was helpful, and if you would like to work with me, you can drop it in the comment below. I will reach out to you. And here's to more effective, successful communication.